Well, tonight, this event has been filled with really deep and emotional stories, right? Now I'm going to talk to you about dancing to hip hop. And I want to pause just a second to let those words sink in and also have it connect to all of the goodness that is right here. Just as a way of introduction, I am a middle-aged guy, and I can now say that I am in my late 40s. On a good week, not approaching the holidays, I'm about 30 pounds overweight. I'm a white-collar professional. I'm a dad to 2 great kids, and some might even say that I am a little bit musically challenged. I probably should not have chosen the topic hip-hop. I probably should not be doing a TED Talk about dancing to hip-hop. Now, before I get too self-deprecating, I just want to say that back in the day, in the late 80s and the early 90s, old school, I wouldn't exactly say that I was the main attraction at the Shiloh subdivision community pool. But, I could hold my own when it came to breakdancing, especially when it came to spinning and locking and popping. And I don't know if this tells the story, but basically, I found this in the archive the other day. The swoosh of great blonde hair, the colorful sweater vest over the white t-shirt, the bleached white socks with the cool brown loafers. If this doesn't say, gather round, actually back up because this running man is headed to the Cabbage Patch, I don't know what does. The funny thing is, when I was looking at this the other night, I think it's funny that girl, she's looking at me, and, and I think she's saying, oh yeah. But for all practical purposes, that was way back then, and this is today. And I have 2 great kids, as I was talking about, and they have this ongoing debate amongst themselves. My daughter, who's 11 years old, she is a competitive dancer, and she is constantly getting into a debate with her brother, my son, who is 13, about, is dancing a sport? And they go at it all the time. And she is constantly saying that, what she does on the hardwoods in a dance studio is just as athletic as what he does on the soccer field as a competitive soccer player. And so when I learned that for a mere $10, I could be a part of a drop-in adult hip-hop class this summer, I thought that this was awesome. I could join the debate of my kids. I could lose a little bit of weight. But most importantly, I wanted to demonstrate to my daughter that what excites her excites me, and what interests her is fascinating to me. And so I took some dance hip-hop classes. Yep, that's me, in the blue. It was really cool. It was really cool because for the first time maybe ever, my daughter and I actually got to change places. And so normally it's me behind the plate glass, sitting in the air conditioning out there with all the dance moms, peering in, watching her, and this time I was inside that glass box and she was outside critiquing me. And I really had no idea that this really small act in this really small class was actually going to teach me some really big things about parenting. So if you're still with me, I'd love to share just a few of those things with you tonight. You guys still with me? Okay. I don't want to have to show that thing again. So the very first thing is, have the courage to walk into the room and be a little bit different. So besides the instructor, I was the only male in the room, in a big room full of women. And when I say that I was the only male in the room, in a room full of women, what I really mean is that I was the only male in a dance studio full of really attractive women. Some might say, as I heard somebody say on the way out of dance one time, what's the class that has the smoking hot ladies? So it was after the fact that I learned that this class was actually made up of reigning beauty queens that was trying to do something a little bit different to prepare for the swimsuit competition of a pageant, or that they were professional aerobic instructors. And then there was me. And so I did what any other guy would do. I walked in and I went over to the corner of the room and I stood there. And finally, I had enough courage that I actually joined the ladies on the back row. And for those of you in the back row, you know that you're on the back row for a reason. It's because you just want to blend in. And it wasn't until about a quarter of the way into this dance class that for some inexplicable reason, the instructor decided to rotate the rows. So I was not on the back row, I was actually on the front row. And I don't know why he did this. The only thing that I can think of is that he actually maybe just cared for me just a little bit and thought that, he might want to see me live just a little bit longer, because if we moved to the front row, we were closer to the door, and so that meant that when EMTs and paramedics came in to actually resuscitate me, then they didn't have to go so far to the back of the class. But it was one of those things where, being on the front row, I realized something. I realized that I was disrupting the class a little bit. Not in a bad way. I was actually disrupting it kind of in a good way, because as somebody that was new to this whole environment, I was moving a little bit different, and I had a perspective that was a little bit different. And because I was moving a little bit different, everybody else was moving a little bit different as well. And it reminded me, going into that room, of all of the times that I have gone into a PTA meeting or some sort of elementary school or some sort of social setting, and I'm the only guy, or I'm the only dad, or I'm the person that is the oldest by far. And it's not sort of like in romantic comedies or in movies where the guy actually goes in, committed to his kids, into a room full of women, and all the women are like, tell me more. It wasn't like that for me. I don't know why with all this goodness. But it wasn't like that for me. And oftentimes, I was met with, what are we going to do with this guy? Whose committee are we going to put this guy on? I was oftentimes met with sort of skepticism about my motivation for why I was even there, or confusion about why I was asking about things that were a little bit different, and offering suggestions about things that maybe we could do a little bit different. And it was after that I realized that that is the big point, especially when it comes to parenting. I believe that being different isn't a weakness. Being different is really a strength. And if you start thinking, especially as a parent, that being different is a strength, you realize that that strength actually can be something that you can turn into influence. You shouldn't just walk into the room and sort of go with the flow and sort of hope for the best. You should think about how you can be a great influence to your kids. And so I really do believe that it's important for moms to be den leaders of Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. And it's important for dads to go and be volunteers at the elementary school Valentine's Day parties, because it's important that we have those different perspectives, not from a gender aspect, but because differences are good things, especially when it comes to your kids. I don't think that we should all be in the back row just trying to blend in. I really do believe that, especially when it comes to our kids, we should, as parents, sort of move up to the front row and make sure that they understand that that's really how you can make a difference, and you've got to be on the front row to actually influence. The other thing I learned is that you've got to have courage with your own kids. And you got to have courage to be able to say no when all the other kids are doing something or all the other parents are moving in some sort of direction, but you don't believe that it's the right direction for you or for your own kids. Every child is different and every family is different, and I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to be the family that walks in the room and moves to a little different dance and be the parent that actually moves to a little different beat. And it's actually that different beat that I'd like to expand on next. Break parenting down into beats and counts, but really focus on the big stuff. It was one of those beginning introductory hip-hop dance classes that I went into the room, and I could tell that the instructor was like, oh, here we go. He's back. And I would get through the class, and I remember it was one time that he actually came up to me after class, and he said, hey, man, I just want to tell you, you are doing great. I didn't have a lot of hope for you. Now, don't get me wrong, you didn't get any of the details right. Your moves weren't that great, but you got all the really big stuff right, and you kept up. And you got to remember that every one of these classes, had a different dance, and you were learning a different dance. And so a lot of these dances actually had about 120 different moves. And so we would break everything down into smaller segments of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That would be the dance. And you would break it up, and it went actually about that fast. And so you can imagine me trying to keep up with somebody like all of them, like those folks, trying to keep up with them and have it go that fast, and then you times that 8, you multiply that by 15 to actually get 120 different beats. It was really something else. And what I realized through that process is that you don't have to get everything right. In our family, we have created values. We actually talked about the values. We sat at the dining room table, and we worked out the values. We wrote them down. And, I just remember thinking in dance class one time, golly, I didn't get any of those moves just right. But by the time I realized that I hadn't gotten it right, I was actually already on to the next big thing, and I would get the big things right. It was like when you look at a big picture, and you keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in, and you can always see that somebody's hair is out of place or that somebody has a pimple, and you focus so much on the little stuff that you sometimes forget the bigger picture, which is that this is a beautiful picture of a family, or a beautiful picture of a family. I think that so often, so many times, we actually think that by breaking things down into individual segments, and by the way, this isn't necessarily some sort of big dramatic insight, that to be able to do big things, you have to break things down into segments, but I think sometimes we actually think that when we're breaking those things down into beats or counts or segments, that if we don't get them perfect and we don't get them just right, then it doesn't roll up to anything big. I remember thinking that and that's just not true, by the way. I remember thinking that when my kids were young and when I was a young dad and a young parent, I remember thinking, and some of you parents may remember thinking sort of the same thing. I remember thinking in a time of frustration, is this the moment that I am screwing up my kids? I remember thinking after, a particularly bad 10 or 15 minutes, oh my gosh, is that the 10 or 15 minutes that they're going to remember and is going to define our relationship, and that's what they're going to remember when they have to make the decision if they put me in a nursing home? And then I just relaxed. Because even though we might not be getting the individual things always right, we might not be getting all the details right, as long as you have your eye and as long as you have defined the bigger items, the bigger values, everything is going to be okay. The other thing I learned is that even when you've been kicked in the head, you got to get up and be supportive. There was one time where I was on the floor and I was about to pop up, and the lady next to me hit my head with her raised leg with such intensity and force that I don't know if you guys remember, but like in the cartoons when people would be down on the ground after being hit and the stars were swirling, that's what it was like for me. And I remember as I was trying to get up, drenched in sweat, that I looked over at my daughter, and she was through the glass, and she was so full of pride, and she gave me this thumbs up. And that helped me get up, and it helped me move on. And I remember thinking all through that process that to me is what parenting is like. We need to pay attention to, on this journey of parenting, we need to pay attention to the breadcrumbs that are along the way of support. Our kids give it to us, other kids give it to us, and parents give it to us, and we should be supportive of each other. You always got to get up, even when you've been kicked in the head. So those are the big three things that I walked away with from a summer of adult hip-hop class, and I did walk away with one other thing, which is, you know what? It may seem like that music and dancing are really small things, but they are big, powerful, emotional connectors that connect all of us. And life is just better when we have music as a part of our lives. And even though I've been talking about parenting tonight, I want to let you know that even if you're not a parent, all of this could be replaced with, what hip-hop dancing actually taught me about life, which is, you've always got to have the courage to walk into the room and be different. You've got to break things down when life gets too big into individual beats, and you've got to get up even when you've been kicked in the head, and you got to be supportive of each other. So I hope tonight you realize that little small things throughout the course of being a parent or throughout the course of life actually can help you as long as we pay attention to things like this. And I hope that as you continue on your path of parenting or life, that you always keep moving. Thank you.